I believe. I don't think he's joining us, but let's see how it goes. If he walks in, if you see a guy walking in on stage, that's probably Mark then. But let us get started. Shall we do a quick round of introduction? Tina, I'll start with you ladies first, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm Tina Sablik. I'm a general manager of a Riyadh-based interior company. We do everything in-house, based from the interior design, architecture, construction. And also, I'm a certified Feng Shui consultant approved by the International Feng Shui Association Singapore. So that will be a quick brief of my introduction on the team.
Thank you for being here today.
Hi, I'm Tom Williams, director with Gensler. I'm based in Dubai. We have offices all over the world, of course, and quite excited to be here and share some thoughts.
Hello. I'm Chris Lowe. I'm lead lighting designer for Diriyah Company in Riyadh. So we're developing the Diriyah project, and I'm overseeing the quality, the design quality across the entire Diriyah portfolio.
Hello. I'm Scott Pride. I'm the design director for DLR Group. We're based in Dubai. I've been in the region for about 15 years, and it's been amazing to see the transformation of the region. It's been incredible to see the growth and development. So I'm very honored to be here today.
Thank you for being here.
Hi, my name is Hisham Gandour. I'm a furniture designer of limited edition pieces, and I've been doing this for over 20 years. I work with noble materials, as the pieces are very limited editions.
Thank you. And flew in all the way from Paris. We are so lucky to have you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I've prepared some questions that were shared with you in advance, full disclosure. They are for everybody. So if you feel like this is your question, just jump on it, take it, and run with it. Let's start with the big one. Does prioritizing human well-being in design inherently limit architectural creativity? Yes, please.
Okay. On contrary, I believe it widens the aspect on the design. It gives us, as a designer, much more freedom. It gives us an in-depth insight on the materials, spatial layout, understanding of the purpose of the project. Then it also it's important to understand that the well-being and design are both complementary forces. So we, as a designer, must balance in between. So, on contrary, they're not dividing the space. It gives us the more freedom and more in-depth knowledge on how to create either residential or commercial spaces.
That's an interesting take, yeah?
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, I think that's sort of summing up what we do as designer is design for human beings. Unless we're designing a factory, our designs are for humans. So their well-being is what we should be doing in general.
I think lighting might have a bit of a unique perspective on this because unlike architectural physical, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they can put it up, it would be great. But
so I was saying with lighting design, unlike built physical space, light is a transient temporary overlay, so you can apply that in many different ways. It doesn't permanently affect the space or the structure itself, so it's quite a flexible, dynamic component of design.
Hisham, I wanted to ask you, because we're all working in a different scale, obviously. In your pieces, we had a coffee a little bit earlier, and you were telling me that you're using these gemstones in your work and how it's so inherent to everything that you do.
Absolutely, absolutely. As everyone here is mentioning that they design the actual space, but I design pieces to be placed in this space. Not only pieces, I believe they're nice, but I think about the well-being of the person. For example, I designed a table with lapis lazuli, which is semi-precious stone. And you should know with the feng shui that lapis lazuli really helps the improvement of thought and stability and self-healing. So I also incorporate that in the design space. I don't design just a piece because it's a piece. It has to be comfortable to the eye, to the mind, and everything else.
Do you guys overall feel like there is obviously more awareness around like mental health and well-being? Maybe the pandemic fast-tracked that, right? I mean, it's changed so much of our perception. You know, we think different about like prime real estate, for example, because if you lived in Burj Khalifa but couldn't open a window, then, you know, it wasn't so great after all, right? So do you feel like this really fast-tracked the growing notion awareness of how people feel in a space, and then not only on the, you know, it's great that we can be more productive in offices, but also in like a residential, like I guess the brief has changed a lot from clients as well, right? Can you share a little bit about what you're often asked for?
I think, you know, it's interesting because, you know, as a young student, when you come into this world of design, you always got to think about, you want to design buildings, you want to design spaces, and you're really got to focus on people. Of course, it's the users. That's number one in terms of how people learn about space and actually interact with space. So I think the importance here is to actually think of spatial design in a way which is all about comfort levels for people and how they use different spaces. And of course, ultimately, it's about creating spaces with greenery. We call it sort of green and blue, like lots of blue sky or lots of water or lots of greenery, depending on the location. So I think the importance here is to really analyze all the layers around the aspect of well-being to help us generate the very best out of design and spaces. So, and that's infused in the very, very outset in terms of designers, certainly architecture school. So that's something that we live with every day. And if you don't do that, then you're really not thinking about people's needs in the right way. So.
Yeah, I think, you know, architecture and design is really a bit of an experiment anyway, and oftentimes we're sort of competing with nature in order to create spaces that sort of mimic the best of what nature has to offer and allow human beings to function in an environment that's as close to nature as possible. So when we have so many more tools available nowadays to measure light, measure the effect that light has on people. We have the ability to legislate the size of windows openings, the amount of daylight that people get. We have a lot of administrative tools that allow us to control these environments much, much more. So as designers, I think it's sort of incumbent upon us to make the most of those tools and you know, keep relearning the lessons that we've all seen in the past, that maybe former cultures have taken advantage of nature in a better way than perhaps some of our more modern buildings do.
And to refer on your mention of the pandemic era, the pandemic actually showcased that we are that our living environment has a huge impact on us, and it reflects our inner state and outer state. So if we are very healthy, very mentally stable human beings, that will showcase on our surroundings, and vice versa. So if we are not very clear, like on our spiritual state, mental state, physical state, then our living or working environment will showcase that also. You can see some like people that are hoarding stuff and clutter, living in a clutter, and that's also a resemblance of our inner state. So we are in very much very deep connection that we, or mostly people think it's not just living space and us. We are both in one living circle, let's say.
How is that in the Giga projects?
Well, I was just going to come back to, it reminded me of a quote, and I don't know who to attribute it to, but it's something along the lines of humans influence the built environment and create the built environment, and then the built environment influences and creates us as societies and cultures. So I think there's definitely a bi-directional relationship between those elements.
How important is data for you? I know that in your firm you guys are really big on data and research, and it's what you guys do is truly incredible. How is that for you? How do you guys go about it? Do you have your in-house sources? Like, what kind of data are you looking for? Like, how do you stay?
Definitely, yeah. It's not quite so much my wheelhouse, but we have a whole smart cities team that are gathering data on absolutely everything, every aspect of the project, of usage, energy consumption, people movements, how buildings are occupied and used, and footfall in throughout the whole arena. So it's a massive piece of the development company's targets for the project.
And Scott, you touched on this a little bit already, talking about the certain elements, right? I mean, it's no rocket science that, you know, when we listen to water, it makes us feel calm, to give you a real simple example. But can the pursuit of well-being in design ever be universally applicable, or does it only cater to specific cultural or social economic context? Is it like one size fits all, basically?
Look, I think human beings need light, they need greenery, they need fresh air, they need blue sky, right? And so universally, yes, we need those things. What's important, of course, with any project, in our case, you know, we develop a lot of mixed-use projects, and the importance of really analysing every single layer of what we're trying to do. So we start with a narrative. Before we put a single piece of line on paper, we actually just try to understand exactly the culture, the context, the ambition of what the place is about. And that will ultimately generate designs which are really in keeping with the location. And that's built around all the ingredients around the things I've just mentioned, of course. And then on top of that, of course, culturally, especially when you look in this region, you look at the Bedouin tents, for example, you look at the nomads and the way people travel, and you think about the courtyard spaces. The courtyards have been around for centuries, and they're there to help with aid cooling and create communal spaces. So in a way, what we try to do is look at that and blow that up in a much bigger way within our projects to ensure that we have the best communal spaces around the needs of obviously that typology. So we really look at it from the ground up, and all that leads obviously to a greater project, a greater building, greater spaces for people. So it's all of those things, and the real essence is to really, I mean, we're problem solvers as well, right? We come up with things and we have to think, okay, how can we get the best out of it? And the truth is that you have to really think about the end user, and of course to do that you have to really build it up from the understanding of context and culture and comfort levels. So yeah.
How do you then create spaces with a sense of belonging for such a variety of end users? Different generations, different needs, different people looking for different experiences, maybe under the same roof. $1 million question.
Yeah, that's tricky. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and at its most basic, we all have sort of the same needs. So in terms of what architecture does, speaking just of architecture, our aim is to sort of answer the most basic and then make it beautiful. So I'll just take a little bit of a tangent. I think the beauty aspect of architecture also contributes to well-being. And so when we're in events like this and we're talking about not just architecture but design in general, I think part of human well-being is not just the air quality or the access to the daylight. It's the presence that element has and what the effect that has on us as human beings. It affects mental health is a big topic nowadays, and I think the way that we interact with our environment directly impacts our mental health. So there's a lot. I don't think it necessarily has to do with age or culture or gender. It has to do with how we as human beings interact with our environment.
Do you feel that, like, in certain typologies, let's say as in residential, for example, or in an office, people are more willing to spend a bigger bucks on this? Because in office we link it to performance so strongly, right? So it's probably very clear statistics on, you know, the impact of daylight in a space. And in residential, yeah, we all want our kids to breathe clean air, and this is where you're gonna spend the money. But in other spaces where you probably spend less time, let's say, you know, the restaurant could be so beautiful. Do you see that there is less demand for overall, less demand for the focus on well-being, let's put it that way?
It really depends. Again, like you mentioned the really basic stuff. Everyone, every age, every culture, but maybe certain culture which would look at something more. They emphasize. I don't know. Maybe in Sweden, someone would be interested in having a sauna in their apartment, versus someone in another country. It's like, I don't need it. That kind of.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, and then that's coming down to residential, right? So you want to
I hit more the residential.
Yeah. And this whole, like, I mean, I guess that's also how the brief changed, right? Because now there's this, everybody's doing ice baths and saunas, and because it's trendy. And then speaking of trends, I wanted to ask, maybe you, Tina, in particular, how do you feel about biophilic design? Is it a buzzword? Is it here to stay? How do you feel about this? We are here to talk about trends also, after all. So
yeah, well, to be honest, as a biophilic design, it is trending category, but as a need and as a right as a humans, it's very it's a human basic and need to be connected and stay connected with the nature, especially in this, let's say, perfect time with surfaces that are so smooth, the walking paths that are without any, I don't know, rocks or some other thing that will disrupt the perfectionism of the overall urbanistic plans. That's why the biophilic design, it's so important to stay connected with the nature as a human beings. So it is proven so many times that, as you mentioned before, the light, the plants, it reduces the level of cortisol, the stress level, and everything. So it's even though it's trending, it is here for ages, and it is let's say one of the primary human rights to be and to stay connected with the nature. So
do you feel like we've only just labeled it, and it must be done well, right?
Sure.
I think that there's still a lot of people who think that you put a plant in the office and people are gonna, outperform one another. That's just not the way it goes, right? Biophilic design, gentlemen, any thoughts on it? Trends here to stay? Do you agree with Tina? Disagree?
No, I agree with what Tina said. I think the long-term trajectory is there. I think we're heading in the right direction, and I think that's driven through a lot of latest research. You mentioned like certain health trends like sauna and ice bath and things like that. I think there's a growing consciousness with the internet of what it requires to be healthy and what that might mean in the built environment and the spaces we inhabit, whether that's our home environment or our office environment or leisure activities. Lighting is obviously a key part of that, and I think one of the things that we're almost kind of relearning from the past again. We're kind of going back to old knowledge, deeper kind of knowledge that's been around for many years, many centuries. And one of architecture's principal roles in the past was how to get light, natural light, into the building, because there wasn't the possibility of using any other light source for a very long time. And it's only as we've got electricity and we can now deploy light in different ways artificially that has changed architecture. That's allowed deep floor plates, that's allowed us to remove daylight, that's allowed to greater efficiencies in some respects, but it's also had a massive detrimental impact on well-being as well. So I think part of what we're seeing at the moment is a kind of return to kind of older, deeper principles that are being reapplied to design and architecture. And I hope that trend continues. We've got a long way to go, but I think we're on the right path.
Yeah, very, very positive. How do you feel about it, Scott?
I think we've touched on a few things in this talk. I think it's interesting because the pandemic, I think, definitely elevated the need for change, I would say. You know, I think the comfort levels, I keep bringing up comfort levels, but the idea that, you know, we've now run full circle with typologies that are also kind of becoming 24-hour communities of connections. So it's not just purely residential districts or office districts. Everything's becoming more combined to create a true 24-hour community. So ultimately what that means, I think, is that we're looking at the breakup of spaces with the fusion of you know, landscaping and lighting and all those good things to really capture space, which means ultimately that there's no negative spaces, actually spaces which are really positive, always connected and always linked. And I think the pandemic, in a way, caused everybody to sort of be closed off. And I think so more than ever now, I think it's about trying to look at the balance of how human beings interact with each other. In my personal view, is I think that the interaction of these typologies that come together with light and greenery and in some cases water, which can be a bit tricky in this region. Some cases you have to be careful with when you say the word water, but I think that those things all together will lead to successful places, whether it's you know, macro scale or micro scale. All of those things are part of the inherent approach to what we should do to really capture the present and the future. And I think, yeah, definitely 2020 had a big impact on the world, I think, and made us really think probably a little bit differently about how we want to interact. So, yeah.
Thank you, Scott. Anything maybe from your research that you can share with us, something like mind-blowing, something that you may know that we don't know yet on?
I mean, a lot of it is sort of reconfirming what we sort of intuit in our design, and just sort of the way that we sort of tend to design is just confirming. So measuring natural light. Practical example might be something as boring as an office to residential conversion, for example. So when we're evaluating a building that is designed as an office space, we're changing the use to residential. So then we need to consider a different use, which is sort of what you were referring to earlier. And a lot of that has to do with the depth of the floor plate to find the optimal distance that natural light can come into the space. And it's a bit different for residential than it is for office. So there's, you know, sort of that magic dimension that of about, you know, let's say 10 to 15 meters, where the building is either viable as a conversion or it's not. Something as simple as that. So if it's really deeper than that, then the building is not really a suitable candidate, and it just won't pencil out. I mean, it speaks to what we do as designers, but it also speaks the same language as our clients, the developers that are trying to do something, change the use of a building, for example. So lessons like that are useful for existing environment because existing buildings are the most sustainable, right, reuse of existing assets. You hear this quote sort of thrown around, what if all the buildings that were designed were all the buildings that were ever going to be designed? If you're speaking about sustainability. Now, we know that that's not the case, but there's a lot of lessons to be learned, I think, in thinking about buildings that way.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's a really great insight. And we see this convergence. I mean, many of us are here from Dubai even today, and we see this happen all the time. And well, also I think as a result of the pandemic, but we see so much, especially in the centers, conversing. You touched on sustainability, and I would love to take that a little bit further. Can the focus on human well-being in spaces sometimes conflict with sustainable practices, and where should the priority lie? You guys are lucky we have Mark joining us. Mark, thank you so much. No worries. Grab a seat. We're just touching on sustainability. So fill in later when you're ready. Anyone? Sustainability or well-being?
I think sometimes the sustainability standards, at least some of the older sustainability standards, can actually be in conflict with what I would understand as true sustainability. So we're targeting kind of, in some instances, semi-arbitrary metrics, which actually drive designs to overperform compared to what human well-being may need in certain spaces. And I understand that to be true in terms of lighting. It's something that back in the UK when I was working there, I spoke about quite a lot, because it was something that we were given these targets by clients. You have to meet the sustainability target. But in doing so, in actually meeting that sustainability target, you are having to over-design the building beyond which you would actually be comfortable doing as a designer and what you thought was right for the context of that building. So I think sometimes these things, it's tricky because these standards are trying to create a broad overarching principles which can be applied to many different typologies and scenarios. But there's also in that the role of the designer and their skill and their judgment in terms of what's right in that particular context. And I think sometimes there might need to be a bit more flexibility in some of these standards. And I think the newer ones are written more like that, but going back a few years, some of the older ones were very, very rigid.
Okay, interesting take, Tina.
For sure. I'm not sure if it can be one over the other.
Or the other.
Yeah. For example, in construction, we can maybe build a well-being resort, but we will bring heavy machinery on site, and we will not be net zero. So it's not to decide or pick one or the other. It's the purpose is and main goal is to bring that into a balance. So I believe it's a trick. It's also a trending word. I believe, we need to stay towards it, towards achieving the sustainability, but it must be, let's say, the electric cars. We maybe reduce the gases and CO2 and everything, but then we have lithium batteries, and that are the main concerns regarding the health issues and for the drivers. So I believe it's all about the balance. Even in this.
I guess as designers and architects, we're always pressured to do the right thing, right? But also I can imagine that it's sometimes challenging because you have legislation, you may not have the tools or the products in place to help you achieve your end goal, right? How do you surround yourself with people with a like-minded mindset to get there in the end, to take you from A to B and not to compromise on your well-being goals, for example, or your sustainability goals in the long run?
Firstly, I wanted to say that sustainability it's not just a word. It's not just a subject on its own right. It should be infused into inherent design, full stop. I think that the importance of, start with passive design to start with. So passive design is developed, it's very important in this region as well, the way that buildings are joined together in the right way to think about shading and connections with orientation. For example, the east and west facades see a lot more sunlight, so you tend to limit the amount of glazing on those sides traditionally. So what I'm saying is I think the importance here is to think about true principles in sustainability from the very outset, through a passive needs, passive means, and the importance of thinking about the shading coefficients to improve the shading as best as possible. Obviously, and then that leads to the other layers of design, renewable energies and all those things that are important, solar control, and other uses that come into play. So I think inherently you have to look at all of these things from cradle to grave and decide really how far to take these elements. But I mean, for us at DLR Group, we really passionately look at the principles from the outset and ensure that orientation is number one, and that leads us to the next phases of thinking. Now, the last thing I'll say is flexibility. Flexibility is another key word which is very important to uses and how people interact with the technologies around sustainable uses as well. So I think all of that's coming, and all that's part of everything that we are currently looking at. And the importance of these projects are really about inherently understanding the buildings we're designing, and then understanding how flexible they can be for the needs of the users as well. So it's a whole medley of different principles. Yeah.
Yes, Mark, as a managing partner in XBD Collective, thank you for making it. Please share
Sorry for being late, first of all.
No problem.
I agree with Scott, because if you look at the basics of well-being, at least the basic parameters, probably we start with achieving certain degree of comfort in the spaces where we do our activities, work, or residential. And this starts with being like the right temperature, good acoustic levels, something that makes us feel good in the space. And sustainability, as you mentioned, passive design, is all about getting to these levels without having to apply active elements. So potentially getting good levels of diffuse light in our living spaces, achieving this through passive design, is also providing good well-being standards into the space. The same for when we try to achieve controlling the light, making sure that we are aware of what's happening outside the building. We see sometimes we see that we spend our whole day inside an office. We arrive at 8:30. We spend the whole day. Sometimes we work in cubicles that are deep inside the spaces, and we don't even have access to the natural light outside. And we leave home. We go home at 6 p.m., 7 p.m., whatever. And all of a sudden you reach home and that's it. And it's strange because this process affects how we feel, the stress levels. On the other hand, if we achieve this connection with the outside world through design that is correctly oriented to the best views, achieving natural light inside the spaces, good temperature levels, your stress levels gradually reduce, and day after day you end up feeling it. So I think it's connected most of the time. Basic parameters of sustainability are connected to basic parameters of well-being design. So I believe in it as a whole more than one or the other in this sense.
Now you guys work mainly in residential, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but we're from Dubai. We kind of know what we are working on. Do you feel like in residential spaces, and I touched on this a little bit earlier on, that people expect you to be even more advanced because this is where we spend most of our time, this is where our kids grow up, so they are maybe super or extremely looking for clean air, crazy water installations. Like I look at my own house, for example. I'm obsessed, I'm Dutch, we are obsessed with clean air and clean water, probably more than anyone else. Do you feel that that's part of the residential brief, that this is very particular for that type of clientele that you're working with as well?
Well, it's interesting because we do both now, multi-residential developments, commercial developments, and also single residential projects.
Okay.
And I would say that the main difference is that when it's a private residential unit, it's very important to understand the brief from each client, because while for multi-residential or for developers, we try to apply the universal standards of well-being, and you apply, yes, there is a brief like target clientele, age range that you expect to live there, and then what you provide as a design, it will adjust to these parameters. But for a private family, it's very important to understand what well-being means for that person that will use that bill. And sometimes, for me, well-being 20 years ago, it was being very social all the time, and that was it. Like if I can socialize, I'm happy, and then I don't need natural light. Now, 20 years later, I change a little bit my priorities. So understanding what the priorities are when it comes to a private bill is very important, because each one of us will have a different opinion on what well-being means for us. So I think it's more about understanding the brief of each client rather than really saying, oh, it's going to be something. It's true that they expect the next level of well-being, high technology, latest trends, and it's nice, but I think it's more about the person and what they understand as well-being.
I hear two things. I hear different needs. I hear universal standards. Also, here we go again, right? And also, I think if you're building multi-residential, it must be really complex to find that balance between the one size fits all, right? Different skills, I said it earlier. Hisham, I think in your work there is inherently very little waste, and it's very much sustainable because you do limited pieces, right? And that's
very true.
Was that always a very particular decision that you wanted to only limited pieces
Yes.
for one specific client? And
No, not for one certain clients.
Okay.
Because not one specific client would buy that piece. But I didn't want to. I was not thinking about sustainability because between you and I, it's been that word has been overused and overused, and people try to do that a lot. But it really depends. I mean, I want it to be a little bit different than the norm. Not someone who's looking for a piece of a side table, say, to be a little bit different. A niche. I was looking for a certain niche. So sustainability was not in my mind.
okay, yeah, I see that. One last question before I'm going to open it up to the audience, see if there are questions. I know it's a little bit warm, but let's try to stay focused. We're getting there. It's getting better. And I'm missing the cold drinks, that's for sure.
I was going to interrupt you on that.
Okay, guys, so here we go. Are designers putting too much pressure on spaces to fix well-being issues that may be caused by broader societal problems? Anyone? There's no right or wrong, right? So just give me your thoughts on how you feel about this. Like, are we being called in to fix other people's issues or general people's issues? Is this?
I think there's a certain amount of that for sure. There have been a lot of examples, just even in recent times, where design ideas have been put forward that are just not answering the question about human well-being. The most famous one that I can think of is the proposed dorm at University of California, Santa Barbara, put forth by Charlie Munger. And he wanted to make a hyper-efficient student housing where I think the design had 70% of the dorm rooms would have no access to natural light. And the fact that a design like that could be tabled in, I think it was put forward in 2022, is astounding. So I think the battle's not over. All of us as designers still have to monitor ourselves and pay attention to human well-being in our designs and not forget, what our sort of basic core remit is.
Tina, yeah?
Yeah. It's also important to communicate everything before the design with the end user of the space, because they must acknowledge that it's not a magic formula for a better life or something. Of course, when implementing the well-being principles, it will enhance the overall living space or working space, but the client must be very much aware of our power as a designer. Like, we cannot shift completely your life, but you need to also exponentially grow with the implemented design and well-being principles. So it's also important.
Anyone? Final thoughts? No?
Yeah, I agree. I think we tend to finish university thinking that we will sort all the problems of the world with our designs and architecture and interior design, and gradually we realize that it's not possible. But as long as we understand what we can contribute with, and in conjunction with other, areas, we can do our part, and I think it's very important for sure.
Can I just also add, all of this is about evolution, right? We are always learning from each other. Over the last centuries, you look to see how man and woman, of course, but together has, learn from each other, and you keep adapting and keep learning. And so the importance is that even these talks is great because we're all coming together and we're talking about such an important subject, and we're learning from each other different ways to think about the subject, and it goes hand in hand with pretty much everything. So the important message really is that we keep adapting, keep evolving together, and that's really where the future lies, is that we all learn from each other, and that's the main message really, is to just keep listening, keep learning, and keep moving forward.
Yeah. Thank you. I'd like to end on that note. That's beautifully said, and then that also gives us an opportunity to open it up to the audience. Keep learning, as you say. I will take one or two questions. If there are always questions, but who will go first? I'll get you a microphone. Don't be shy. We are here together. Nobody, really? That would be, yes, please. Someone brave. I will bring you a microphone myself. Whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay. Hi, my name is Amara Sadiq, and I'm working at Spacemaker. I'm an interior designer. So I'm kind of freshly graduated. I've been graduated for a year now. And you said that you design according to your client's needs and what he wants, right? So my question is, I feel like as interior designers, we kind of have a view of the future, or where we're heading to the future, or where the design of the future is heading. And so is there a way that you can kind of prepare your client for that, even if he's stuck on what he wants and what he needs? Is there a way that you can kind of design to help him prepare for the future without him kind of not knowing, but without compromising his design and saying no to his design, whether you feel like it's right or it's wrong?
That's a good question. It's very much about educating your client, but also as a designer, you're often expected to have all the knowledge, right? And the many hats that you wear as a designer. Anyone can share any thoughts on that, Mark? Maybe.
Yeah, we'll start. Yes, it's probably more challenging on the private residential side, because you basically have to every design decision that you take, you need to explain the reasons why you're taking that decision and explaining the impact of taking it or not. So you have to justify every single decision to help them understand that maybe what they had in mind, it was not a successful idea. So the best way of doing it, sometimes using examples, previous work, taking them to other projects, taking them to other properties, and showing them the impact of every decision. And of course, every day that we talk more about sustainability, we talk more about well-being, the clients, we feel that every day they are more educated on that. So it's, as we said, it's an evolution, not only from our side, but also from the clients. Mainly on the private residential, I would say. Also on the developer side, sometimes you have this type of conversations, but normally you are between professionals, so it's a bit easier to understand with each other. But yeah, it's the same thing of listening, trying to make the client understand the reasons why we take the decisions, and evolving together, basically.
That's a good tip. Very much evidence-based statistics, probably get you a long way as well. Any final question before moving on? Yeah, coming your way. Thank you.
When you think about well-being, you think about nature, light, and materiality. What do you see is the role of technology in the future in an evolving world? With well-being.
Good question. Thank you. Technology. Anyone wants to take it? Gentlemen, come on.
I'll go for the light component of your question. So again, a lot of latest lighting technology is actually kind of bringing us back to a kind of more evolutionary environment and an understanding of how light works impacts biology. So an example of that might be something like warm dim lighting, which is a relatively modern invention. As you dim the light down, the color temperature reduces, the light gets warmer. What's that replicating? That's replicating like the dying embers of a fire. So it's replicating light throughout the evening as you're gathered around a fire in an evolutionary historical context. The light dies, grows warmer, dimmer, redder. And we're using technology now to kind of replicate and simulate a lot of more kind of natural environments. The same is true of tunable white light during the day. So we can now tune the light up, increase the color temperature, and simulate the cooler white light coming from a strong sun or a white, cloudy, diffuse sky. So a lot of the modern technology actually allows us and permits us to get back to something that we're more comfortable with from an evolutionary lens. So I think that's where, for me, that's where the technology, the lighting, the latest LED components and technology and control systems allow us to create far more natural environments that are more well-being focused.
Any other good examples that you can think of? Do you want to share? Yeah, you have an example or a question? Wait 1 second, I'm going to give you a microphone. Hold on.
So you're talking about lighting. What about sound? Because that's also something in terms of well-being.
It is, yeah. I mean, I might not be the right person to answer that question, but I know quite a lot of people involved in acoustics, and a lot of modern technologies are obviously improving in terms of the absorption of sound and the control of sound within certain environments, and also acoustic modeling of sound. So if you're building a development near a busy road, what kind of barriers and screening and architectural form can you use in the landscaping and the buildings to actually reduce the kind of ambient noise and the kind of audible kind of distraction that produces to kind of enhance the quality of environment. But I'm not an expert on sound, so within the properties as well. But maybe someone else is more.
And there's a lot to it. I'm sure we could, talk about all these different elements in play and, how technology plugs into that for a whole. That could be in a whole day of talks, but thank you for bringing that up. I really appreciate it. I have to wrap up because I want to be mindful of my next panel as well. So let's put our hands together for my fantastic panel. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Hisham. And thank you, Mark. Thank you so much.